bringing you the truth behind the news. Welcome to The New American.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Paul Dragu. We're glad you joined us. Donald Trump can't come up with the $500 million needed to pay the civil fraud judgment leveled against him by Judge Engoron. Will all this lawfare make him more susceptible to the donor class now? Also, another domino in the electric vehicle scam has fallen as the chief of a major rental company has resigned over an EV-related decision. And in a little bit, the vice president of the John Birch Society joins us to discuss the legislator scorecard project that he worked with Canadian patriots on. We have all that coming up. But first, let's look at why our friendly neighbors to the north really do need a scorecard. Dictator in poor disguise Justin Trudeau is pushing a bill that would level severe penalties against Canadians the government says are advocating genocide. This may come as a shocker, but the bill almost certainly is not what the Prime Minister and his government goons portray it as. Commentator Stephen Moore has called the Online Harms Bill, or C-63, the most shocking of all the totalitarian, illiberal, and anti-enlightenment pieces of legislation that have been introduced in the Western world in decades. Trudeau's justice minister is promoting the bill as a necessary measure to protect children from online sexual exploitation, hate, and cyberbullying. The Canadian government's media regulatory body has weighed in as well, part of an effort to diminish well-founded concerns. One official said, quote, Bill C-63 is meant to bolster the rights of Canadians to express their thoughts and opinions by creating a safer and more inclusive online space. See, folks, nothing to worry about here. This is going to bolster rights, not restrict them. According to global law firm Norton Rose Fulbright, if enacted, C-63 will result in the most significant expansion of Canada's hate speech laws and create one of North America's most rigid regulatory environments for media and social media companies. The 72-page bill would establish 3 new regulatory bodies to police online content. They would be allowed to punish anyone deemed guilty of putting out any of the 7 types of so-called harmful content. Those 7 types would include intimate content communicated without consent, content that sexually victimizes a child or re-victimizes a survivor, content that induces a child to harm themselves, content used to bully a child, content that foments hatred, content that incites violence, and content that incites violent extremism or terrorism. Notice how the last 3 don't mention children. The bill would also allow a judge to sentence anyone who advocates genocide to a life sentence. It would also permit judges to find and put under house arrest anyone deemed likely to commit the crime in the future. Minority Report. The bill is already receiving well-deserved attacks, including from the leader of the opposition Conservative Party and possible future Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre.
What does Justin Trudeau mean when he says the word hate speech? He means speech he hates. I point out the irony that someone who spent the first half of his adult life as a practicing racist, who dressed up in hideous racist costumes so many times he says he can't remember them all, should then be the arbiter on what constitutes hate.
So join me to discuss today's story is Executive Senior Editor of the New American, Steve Bonta. All right, Steve, I know you want to get it out of the way. I butchered Poilievre's name, so say that that's how it should be said.
Poilievre.
All right.
Poilievre, yes, he's French-Canadian, sort of. Yeah, and he's become a bit of an internet star ever since the now famous apple munching video where he's nonchalantly munching on a British Columbian apple while listening to a very, very earnest young liberal know-nothing reporter trying to trip him up, and he just uses the Socratic method on, well, what do you mean by that? Well, define your terms. What do you mean that I'm hostage to Trump and so forth? And so that's the guy. And frankly, you know, intellectually, let alone in term policy-wise and in terms of principles, or he just runs circles around this character.
Well,
Trudeau.
He said it. That's what it is. It's like they want to criminalize speech they don't like. They obviously want to criminalize anyone who doesn't go along with woke ideology and government tyranny. That's what this has come down to, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, let's just get some things clear here. I really love Canada. Okay, I spent a lot of time up in Canada. You know, I would never, ever refer to Canada as America's hat or our fair neighbor of the north, or make fun of the way they say a or a boat. I would never do that. Okay, but in all seriousness, Canada is a great country. They've followed a somewhat different path than we have. But they have a way cooler national anthem, I have to say. I mean, it's really. I love O Canada.
I disagree.
And in particular, O Canada uses that line, the true north, strong and free. And I wondered as I
They're no longer
looked at this
strong
story,
or free.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just ask yourself, I mean, it's really depressing to see them following this road to serfdom so overtly. And, you know, of course, it makes you wonder if we're going to end up following them rather than the reverse.
That's what we're worried about in a way. They could be a harbinger to come here. They seem to be a captured state now by the WEFers and all the...
Well, I mean, but now, I mean, all kidding aside, Canada does not have the same perspective on free speech that we do. They have had hate speech laws of various types in place for a long time. And also, you know, so they're not as absolutists on certain rights, like, you know, gun ownership, which, by the way, has really taken a hit also under this character, Trudeau. The last time I was in Canada for any length time, 7 or 8 years ago, I mean, I fell in with some Canadian gun owner guys. We were talking at a park in Manitoba. We got to talking. These guys were just as rednecky and pro-gun. And at the time, they owned, you know, quote unquote assault weapons. And they were saying, yeah, we can't get as much of the good stuff as you Americans, but we can still get a lot of stuff here. And that's no longer the case. I mean, Trudeau has pretty much transformed Canada into another, you know, Australia or the UK. Yeah. So he's a real dictator. And, you know, there have been a number of, you know, low points during his regime, his reign of error.
Especially during the COVID
during
era.
COVID. And,
post-COVID.
You know, his crackdown on the trucker protest was very much of akin with, of course, what we've been doing with the January 6ers. Not that we have any standing to boast down here in the United States of Senegal. I mean, you know, we are following this same dark road down into, you know, third world political corruption, cronyism, and of course, this kind of woke socialism that's become the order of the day. So, I mean, you know, this new bill has it's not passed yet, so it's not clear whether it'll actually be enacted. Yeah. However, it has created an enormous amount of controversy, and indeed,
well, that's a good sign, right?
Well, yes,
that means there's resistance in there.
There is, and I mean, you know, now Canada is required to hold its next federal elections by October of 2025. Okay, it's one of the so they probably won't have elections this year, although that is an option. They can have snap elections under their parliamentary system, but they probably won't. And so this, frankly, gives Trudeau plenty of time to continue inflicting just body blows and damage on the Canadian body politic. So who knows where it'll end? I mean, the electoral map of Canada now looks fairly favorable. The problem is that in Canada, it's a multi-party system. I mean, in addition to the Liberals, also known as the Grits, and which of course Trudeau represents, and the Conservative Party, the New Democratic Party, or NDP, is often relegated to the role of kingmaker. They do control certain ridings in Canada. Riding is their term for what we would call a congressional district or something like that. And so the electoral math is a little less exact and harder to calculate.
Do they have primaries?
I'm not sure, but I do know one thing that they do in Canada is that they are not permitted to report in the news because Canada, like the United States, is a wide country, has all these different time zones, and so they don't report the election results until all the polls across Canada are closed. So this precludes the possibility that people in, say, British Columbia and Alberta would just say, oh, well, you know, they've already voted such and such way in Quebec, the Maritimes, and Ontario, so we're not going to bother because the outcome. I mean, obviously they do that a lot in the United States. They try this push-pull effect where they say, well, you know, all the big East Coast states have already voted, and here are the results. So you people in Alaska and Idaho, forget about it. You know, nothing you can change the electoral picture. So Canada doesn't do that. They typically only have a campaigning season of a few weeks. You know, they mandated beginning it's like 3 weeks or 4 weeks, something like that. It's very brief. Yeah. None of this, 18-month-long soap opera that we have here in the United States and this protracted
slugfest
primary campaign and all the rest of the stuff. So, yeah, I mean, in that regard, I got to prefer the way the Canadians do things to a certain degree, at risk of sounding heretical on this program. And I also like the fact that Canadians, until the arrival of Trudeau, unlike Americans, generally didn't fear their national government as much because Ottawa was viewed as a pushover.
It seems like that's harmed them. They weren't suspicious enough.
Yes, it's come back to bite them in a big way.
We always told them that was going to come back to bite them in the butt. All right, thanks, Steve. After this, Trump doesn't have $1 billion, half $1 billion to pay a civil fraud judgment. Will he become a tool of the donor class now?
All right, parents, listen up. We've all seen the countless examples of how radical leftists have been destroying American schools. It's no longer just about the terrible math and reading levels. Now, radical left teachers birthed from liberal universities are forcing gender indoctrination in kindergarten. They're teaching lessons on white guilt.
Freedom Project Academy has perfected live online learning over the course of a decade. I get a ton of great feedback about this program, a ton.
They're built on Judeo-Christian values, a classical curriculum. What does that mean? It means they're taught, your children are taught the way that the founding generations of the country. My own son Noah did Freedom Project Academy for several years when he was younger.
The more we tell our friends about these things, the more people will get on board, and I believe that we can be the catalyst to some real change.
We must save the West. Our way of life and our culture is under attack, and because of patriots like you and your project, I have optimism for the future.
If we aren't self-reliant, we aren't free. And if we can't take care of ourselves without the so-called help of government, how much liberty do we really have? That's why the New American Magazine has released a special collector's edition bookazine on this very important topic. It's called Self-Reliance, Foundation of Freedom. America has a rich tradition as being the home of staunchly independent explorers, religious dissidents, and general malcontents who seek to live the way humans are intended to, free. It's time to get back to those roots, and living an independent life is key. In our latest special edition, we cover a number of self-reliance related topics, including the self-sufficiency of the founding fathers, self-reliance lessons from COVID, preparing for a worst-case scenario, financial independence, and the importance of community, among many other important topics. The writers are experts in their fields, and they provide a handy guide to get you started. So go to thenewamerican.com/shop and order your copy. Heck, get two. One for you, another for someone you care about. But even better, for $5 more, you can get our entire collector's edition packet, which in addition to the one on self-reliance, includes Trump World and the Great Reset. Again, visit thenewamerican.com/shop, or you can even order by phone at 920-749-3780, Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 p.m. Central Time. That's 920-749-3780. On Monday, Donald Trump's lawyers said their client can't pay a $454 million civil fraud judgment. According to a filing in the New York appeals court, Trump said the judgment was so large that suretors wouldn't accept real estate as collateral and would need cash to guarantee the bond. A private company like the Trump Organization would need $1 billion in cash to get the bond and to continue to operate, an amount the company doesn't have. Trump's lawyers wrote, defendants' ongoing diligent efforts have proven that a bond in the judgment's full amount is a practical impossibility. This is in regard to the judgment in New York Attorney General Letitia James' lawsuit. Judge Arthur Engoron ruled that Trump and his co-defendants schemed to deceive banks and insurers by inflating his wealth on financial statements used to get loans and make deals. Here's MSNBC reporting what Letitia James would like to do next.
As part of this, New York Attorney General Letitia James has made clear that if he is not able to put up the bond, that she has every intent to seize properties in New York directly from him, Jose.
All right, Steve. So we're seeing the fruits of this lawfare, and we're going to talk about where perhaps this is going next, but that's what they're eyeing now, is seizing his assets, huh?
Well, that's what they've always been eyeing. And I mean, this case is in some respects the most outrageous of all of them, because, as mendacious as the lawsuit, the sexual harassment, all that thing is, the fact is lawsuits are often that way. That's not that they're often very sordid and unseemly. But what we have with this, with the Engoron, with the case being, the Letitia James, Arthur Engoron axis, is an alleged crime in which there are no victims, in which the alleged defrauded parties came and testified on Trump's behalf, in which money was made all around, everyone was happy. And on top of that, even if he was guilty of some, technicality or some nugatory little aspect of the law for which we can, that's, a wrist slap type of fine. This is a deliberate, shameless attempt to take an American citizen and systematically strip him of his assets. Now, that said, a lot of people who aren't, most of us who aren't wealthy don't really understand what wealth is. They assume that wealth equals money or money in the bank. And it doesn't. A lot of wealthy people, most wealthy people didn't get there by just plunking their money into CDs in the bank. You know, appealing as that is for those of us who prefer to lead a simpler life, somebody who sets their sights on becoming wealthy, you know, achieves that through assets that generate income over time. For example, rental properties, real estate, things of this nature. And so these are not terribly liquid. And in fact, they're rather illiquid. And so, you know, when you say, well, Trump's worth is several $billion or whatever, that means liquid and mostly illiquid assets. In his case, of course, he is a real estate developer primarily by profession. So yeah, if push came to shove, he could liquidate his assets or some of them. You know, he could sell the Trump Tower or something like this, or that casino in Las Vegas. I don't know if it would fetch $400 million, but it might. And deal with this. He is, however, he's basically not willing to do it. He's saying, I don't have the cash on hand in my bank accounts. Frankly, few billionaires would have that kind of cash on hand.
Well, he put up the $96 million bond for the EG.
He did, and that doubtless drained down his his liquid assets very considerably right there. You know, I mean, that's, in a sense, it's chump change to people like him, but only in the sense that, he can access other stuff if he needs to. But he's not going to do it. I mean, what he's essentially saying is he's daring them to come and try to take his assets, and they're going to challenge it and appeal it. I think, you know, I mean, there are a couple of themes that come out of this. One that you mentioned.
We need to talk about that. Yeah, does this make them susceptible to the donor class?
I mean,
obviously you don't. You know,
to a degree it might, because to the extent that he's going to be reluctant to just divest himself of some of his assets, to liquidate them, to pay this thing off. But but I don't blame him for fighting back, because this is absolutely amoral, immoral, vicious on the face of it. It is, it is a violation of at least two of the amendments in the Bill of Rights. Excessive fines being imposed, and cruel and unusual punishment to adduce just two, and there are probably others beyond that. It's an absolute abomination.
Is based
so I don't blame him for fighting back. But, if he does choose to fight back, he's going to need a sugar daddy or two to step in and help him get the money somehow, and that will make him beholden to someone like Jeffrey Yass, whom we mentioned earlier this week.
Yesterday, yeah.
So, I don't know. It's going to. There are a lot of things at play here, and frankly, I don't know enough about the arcana of the New York court system and the appeals and what his options may actually be. But no doubt they're going to try to just get this to a higher court. The problem is, of course, that Letitia James, the person driving this, is the New York State Attorney General. Than whom there really is no higher appeal. I mean, I suppose the state Supreme Court of the state of New York, but they may or may not even choose to hear this case. It's
they captured the New York judicial
so that's
system.
One issue. The other issue is this notion that we sometimes entertain that money ultimately trumps political power. That political muscle is nothing against the might of, say, the power of the markets and so forth. And really, when you distill power down to its essence, it really does come down to raw force exercised through courts and their armed janissaries who go out there and arrest and imprison people and so forth and so on. And this is the reason that if a political system decides to turn on itself, on its own people, and on its own moneyed classes, it will succeed in the long run in destroying the economy, the society, and of course, the rule of law.
Yeah.
So politics trumps everything else.
That's
choice of words intended. And, Trump could be as rich as Elon Musk if the powers that be decide to come after him and strip him and divest him of his assets. This happened, a generation ago when they decided to make an example of Bill Gates, back in the late 1990s.
Yeah.
If we just to cite a little bit of history.
I remember that.
Yeah. So Mr. Gates, they went out, Congress went after Microsoft, and they went after him transparently because Microsoft and the big players of the day in this new tech sector, the nouveau riche.
They were involved in monopolistic.
No. They hadn't been playing the game. They hadn't been buying off senators and bribing people in Washington. They truly believed, the Michael Dells and people like this believed in the power of free markets. They were relatively libertarian, and this was unacceptable to political classes. So they took Microsoft, They accused them of being a monopoly. They went after them. And, as I predicted all along, I actually had Microsoft stock at the time, and I sold it the day before the judgment. And I told my broker, I said, because tomorrow they're going to rule against them because they're going to make an example. Oh, that won't happen. Well, it did. And by the end of the following day, after the ruling came out, the value of the stock that I had just sold had dropped by more than 50%. They stripped him down. And then Bill Gates decided to become a member of the establishment, play the game, and so he's okay. And now we leave Microsoft alone and they can continue their alleged monopolistic practices without hindrance.
Right.
That's the way it's done. If you don't rein in big government, you don't have a prayer against big business or big finance or big anything else.
Well, it'll be interesting to see where Trump goes after this and what his next move is. After this, the CEO of Hertz has stepped down after his gamble on EVs turned out to be a complete failure.
Freedom is the cure.
You're dead on. This is the largest experiment performed on human beings in the history of the world.
The more you know.
What they're doing is they're forcing vaccination on people, and I believe they are killing people with this vaccination.
The freer you are.
It's murder. They are basically murdering people in hospitals.
The all-cause mortality we know is now higher in the vaccinated group than the unvaccinated group.
Stay informed on the issues that affect freedom. Get a subscription to The New American today. thenewamerican.com.
All right, we're back, folks. Steve, you wanted to add one extra point before we move on to the next story.
Well, just to further clarify in less than a minute what the point that we were getting to, and that is that a lot of people on the right now have kind of been saying, Trump is winning victory after victory, and all this is just going to fall apart, and he's going to make monkeys of all these people, and he's going to come back triumphant in the fall, and he's going to make things right. He and his epigones and the MAGA movement and so forth and so on. But if what I'm saying is true, don't count the radical left out. Okay?
Yeah,
They understand.
I don't think anyone
to move.
would.
Well, they understand how to use the machinery of the state to destroy their enemies, no matter how wealthy or powerful. Okay, and so this game is far from over. I'm not trying to be, a Cassandra here. Yeah. But don't count. Trump is nowhere near out of the woods, and this latest setback illustrates, as did the thing last week in Fulton County, Georgia. He's got the entire political and judicial and legal class arrayed against him, determined to destroy him.
Right. I don't think anyone listening and watching would even think that this fight is over. I think they're going to go kicking and screaming past the election, and we've covered that. These people are not going to give up, and we're going to continue seeing this. I totally agree. All right, so the green agenda strikes again, this time taking down the CEO of a major car rental company. Hertz head Stephen Scher is resigning after betting the lot on electric vehicles. It seems he learned the go woke, go broke lesson the hard way. Hertz had just declared bankruptcy 2 years ago when Scher took the wheel. Bloomberg hailed him as the perfect person to help the company navigate what it called the EV era. Scher is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and former CFO of Goldman Sachs. True to his calling, he quickly revved up eco-virtue signaling with an order of 100,000 Teslas, along with smaller EV orders from GM and Polestar. According to Fortune, his bets went awry last year when Tesla slashed prices across its lineup to keep growing vehicle sales. This hammered the resale value of used Model 3 sedans and Model Y crossovers just after Hertz had added tens of thousands of those vehicles to its fleet. Even liquidation couldn't save Hertz. As 2023 drew to a close, the company tried to sell 20,000 of its EVs and replace them with gas-powered vehicles. Then in January, Scher summed up the situation for CNBC.
The reality here is that we're experiencing the consequence of a material price decline in Teslas, but in EVs more generally. So at the beginning of this year, when Tesla took down the price of their cars, residual price falls, depreciation goes up. That's obviously a cost to the business. We need to face that reality.
The reality is that people are simply not going to pay for undependable cars that come with expensive repair bills and record-breaking value depreciation. Last October, Hertz blamed EVs for the company's lack of profitability and has since reported its largest quarterly loss since the COVID pandemic. All right, Steve. So I used to think that these guys knew what they were talking about. You know, they have the metrics, they have the research, but they seem to miss something that was obvious to everyone else. One, the economy is in the dumps. People have less money. Inflation is high. And two, EVs are really expensive. So you would think there's a lot of the things don't add up, but yet they still did it. They still invested in all these EVs, and I can't help but thinking that would never have happened if the government wouldn't have pushed its big, fat, ugly thumb on the scales.
Well, this little episode calls to mind an old saying: "The truth hurts." Okay, and that's
good.
Well, I mean that's what you've got here, and it's a little reminiscent of. I mean, here's the thing:
I like that
there is a market for electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles.
It's tapped out.
However, well, it's a niche market. Okay, it has certain, and also it has a lot to do with demographics. These vehicles are a lot more practical in places like China, where most people live in these huge cities, and they never think about, going on a long camping trip to Montana or something like that. That's just not an option for people
living
in China.
Beautiful plains and prairies.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was in China, I rode around. I've even driven electric vehicles made there, and they're kind of cool. I mean, they're very quiet. They purr along, they drive very smoothly, and a lot of them have pretty impressive power. There are certain issues with them, and I really can't speak for the hybrid vehicles. I've never driven a Tesla or anything like this, but this current faddishness of hybrid and Tesla vehicles reminds me a little, in one respect anyway, of this thing that happened about 20 odd years ago, and that was the appearance of some new technology in the form of what we now call the Segway vehicle. Okay, so the Segway, there was all this hype. Someone leaked the white paper on the Segway before it was actually, the patent was cleared, and somebody's created a hovercraft, and there were all these wild rumors. And the people who invented the Segway, which included,
is that thing like you ride around in the mall?
That's a little thing that never tips over, supposedly, although apparently it does. But it has this interesting self-correcting gimbal technology inside it, which was genuinely novel at the time. It was kind of cool, but it was being hyped as something that will completely transform our urban environments. The idea being is that people will opt for these instead of motor vehicles, and it's going to lead to a future of an entirely differently configured cities, to accommodate this new mode of transportation. Well, as it turns out, that didn't happen. And, Segways didn't make a huge amount of money. They're around. There's a niche for it. Turns out that mall cops like them, and, security guards and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's definitely niche-y stuff, and other similar things like so-called hovercraft that use these similar similar technology. They're gimmicky and niche-y. There's a market for them, but you're not going to become the next Thomas Edison or the next Henry Ford. Okay, I think something similar is happening with regard to these electric vehicles. The gee whiz factor has kind of worn off. They are kind of cool in some ways. They operate differently from gas vehicles, as I said, but people haven't thunk it through, as it were. And obviously now, as we're learning that in fact they're really not nearly as nice on the environment vis-a-vis gas-driven vehicles as we were led to believe, because the process of mining the lithium and all the other, rare earth elements that go into producing these incredibly expensive batteries, it turns out is pretty environmentally deleterious and involves child labor in lots of, African countries whose names no one can pronounce. So there's that. Yeah. Okay. But in addition to that, it turns out they're not really that cheap, because, they don't really save much money. They're very cumbrous to recharge. I mean, you can do it in under an hour, but it's not like pulling into a service station, pumping gas, and you're out of there in 2 minutes.
Well, no, and then winter came, and that reminded us of another problem.
And woe betide you if your battery dies, because it's not $1,000. It's what, like $20,000?
Yeah, it's like $25,000
on these things. Yeah. So people are, but it took a few years for people to learn these things, and there's going to continue to be a market for them. And who knows? I mean, at some point in the future, somebody may create some sort of breakthrough technology that will truly render gas-driven vehicles, internal combustion engines, as obsolete as the horse and buggy is today. That may happen. I mean, we can't rule this out. Technology, you never know where technology is going to go. But what's happening now is it's being forced by politically correct or this woke ideology. It's being forced by government mandates.
Right. It's being subsidized in large part.
It's being subsidized and forced and constrained, and people are just kind of rebelling against it and saying, yeah, no thanks.
I don't know if
and by the way, if you rent a car, people who rent cars generally rent cars because they're going to cover distances that can't be covered by taking the local bus or something like that. Okay. So you don't want the inconvenience of a rental car having to go through charging it up. I mean, the last time I rented a car was when I was in Dubai last December, and I had to, I used it to drive the 20 odd miles between my hotel and where the conference was taking place. And I sure as heck, it's hard enough to find a regular gas or petrol station in Dubai. They're not as plentiful as they are here.
Yeah.
You have to drive around a little bit, let alone having to go through the inconvenience of sitting there and letting it recharge for half an hour, whatever it takes. So people who rent cars in particular are going to eschew that level of inconvenience, I would think. That would seem to be, rental car economics 101 to me, but what do I know?
Right. I mean, like you said, the truth hurts, and what's happened is reality has converged with the propaganda, and reality has won. I mean, I think the cheapest EV I ever saw was like a Chevy something. Was it the Bolt or Volt? I forget, or whatever. And it was like $50,000. Well, you can get a brand new Corolla that gets like 35 miles to the gallon for like $30,000 to $35,000, and you can work on it yourself or not. It's just not practical. And now we have, like I said, the inflation, things have gotten more expensive. It doesn't make sense. Like, people just cannot afford it, and they're not.
No, and also, again, just one comment on technology. You can't take for granted that technology will always be able to solve every problem. When I was a kid, everyone thought we'd have colonized Mars by now. It ain't happened because laws of physics.
Elon's working on it. All right. After this, JBS Vice President Wayne Morrow joins us to talk about the Canadian scorecard that he just worked with Canadian patriots on.
Imprisonment, forced labor, permanent separation from my family, perhaps death. I knew what could happen to people who were caught trying to defect, but the watchtowers stood yards away. The possibility of a new life in a different world, one without tyranny, was within sight. The West. I thought of the rewards no longer crushed under the boot of communism. I would work and make money, no longer restrained by the chains of collectivism. I would say what I wanted, without fear of spies and informants nearby. I would be free. The frozen rain and Romanian mud seeped through my gloves and cloths. I fantasized about the fire burning in the wood stove of my parents' home, but I pushed those thoughts from my mind, closed my eyes, and waited for the cover of the darkness.
Get Defector, a true story of tyranny, liberty, and purpose by Mark Hobafkovich with Paul Dragoo, a thrilling page-turner that will remind you how precious yet vulnerable freedom is. Available at shopjbs.org or Amazon. For a limited time, get 20% off your entire order using promo code Defector20 when you purchase Defector at shopjbs.org.
At the beginning of the show, we told you about the latest attack on freedom by Canada's government goon squad. Well, my next guest is going to discuss a tool he helped Canadians develop to help our friendly neighbors to the north get out of this mess. So joining me is the Vice President of the John Birch Society, Wayne Morrow. Hey, Wayne.
Good afternoon. And I'm not a part of the goon squad, I can tell you that.
No, you told me about this last week. You showed me. Yeah. And I'm going to have Kyle back there dial up the website there. It's really exciting. Yep. This is obviously playing off what we've done here with our congressional scorecard, our Freedom Index, that being at the New American. So you decided to help the Canadians come along with. I'm glad you did. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I was at a conference in Savannah, Georgia last year with my wife, and we were involved in it was about choice on COVID-19, anti-vax group, and we had an information table. And I ran across a Canadian who I put on his phone our Freedom Index, which, we have an app for the phone, web app. You can load all the U.S. congressmen as well as the state senators. And he was really taken by that. He goes, boy, this would be great in Canada. And then about a month transpired, and I was on a Zoom call with about, I don't know, probably 350 people from the eastern part of Canada, then about the same for the western part of Canada, describing the process, how it works, what it does. They got pretty excited about it. And about early in January, they sent me a prototype. And now early February, mid-February, and end of the February, so they actually showed me what their scorecard looked like for Canada.
Yeah.
And they said they have a couple million people interested, activated in the country of Canada now to basically do what we do on making voters aware of how people vote. And I know that you'll put that up on your screen, but which was really interesting when I was talking to them, I told them about roughly 27 to 29% of American voters do not vote at all. And we lose elections by a little bit when you talk about, election integrity and cheating and all, but a lot of the registered voters, 20%, 30% of our registered voters do not vote at all. And we lose elections by this much. So, they disenfranchise themselves. Let's look at this for a second. So they sent this out to me for 2021, and this kind of fueled the interest in all of this can look at this, for example. On the did not vote, you can see 40%, some are 38%, but he highlighted blue. They're called registered conservatives. This is Calgary. This is the Cowboys, Yeah. And you got 36 to 38% didn't vote at all, but they were registered, but they didn't vote. Then, of course, as you walk through Ontario, the eastern part of the country, 38, sometimes even high as 48% of the people didn't vote. Can you imagine?
I see that. Yeah.
And here's what it said in the type. It says, if you did not vote, was a party in the 2021 federal election, they would have won almost every province. So it was that close. So if people actually voted their confidence, that would have changed a lot of their MPs and local officials down to the county level if they actually voted. That's the big takeaway. And the reason he's trying to unwind is get people motivated to vote. We have the same problem in the United States, but it was interesting to see the mirror issues, what's going on in Canada as well as the United States.
Yeah. And, well, like we said in the first segment, perhaps what happens in Canada is a harbinger of things to come here. The cultures are similar, not identical, but they are similar. Steve had talked about how he spent time in Canada. I've spent some significant time, but I spent time mostly in the Calgary, the Alberta area. Like you said, it's cowboy land. I hardly could tell the difference between Montanans and Canadians over there. But Canadians are just as frustrated with what's happening there. Obviously, they have that tyrant Trudeau. We have our own tyrant here, puppet Biden and whatnot. But those are double what you're showing, that graph. Those are almost double the numbers that you said are as far as Americans who don't vote. We're talking about 20-something% of Americans, and the Canadians seem to double that. So they need to get involved. But now they have the scorecard that's going to help direct who that's going to help them vote or know who to vote for, right? Because that's why we create these things, because these guys say a lot of things, but they're not necessarily exactly what they say they are they?
That's correct. So this is it's like a child's report card. I'm doing great math, Dad. Just trust me. You'll find out he gets a D. But the thing is, you're right, exactly right. And I think they've sort of given up, with Trudeau acting like a dictator and he's a WEFer. They said, what's the use? That's all part of this scheme, is to give them no hope at all. It's psychological warfare. So they basically bowed out of the whole voting process because they said, what's the use?
Yeah, they're demoralized.
Oh, absolutely right. Demoralization. I mean, Yuri Bezmenov says that in his video being passed around by Musk now, 25 million people. This is an old video, the demoralization. And then, so this is what it's going on is, but it'd be interesting to see as we go through the year, what the results of people voting now after the scorecard, the Canadian scorecard gets put into effect. I think the numbers are going to improve for people voting now because they see they can make a difference. They can change if they get involved. Voting is a constitutional right in the United States as well as any country. I like to see this kind of program for example, in Hungary or in the Netherlands, because they have the same issues. They just don't know.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like everyone should have this. Every country should. should have this. What is your take? It sounds like you spent some time with Canadians. You had mentioned them in the first segment. Where are Canadians as a whole? I mean, you said that they're somewhat demoralized. Obviously, you weren't talking to the demoralized ones because they're looking to create something to get involved. Are they more worried? Are they more involved now that that Trudeau has shown his teeth and the government has shown what tyrants they want to be?
Oh, yeah. Well, the Canadians say they pray for America all the time because they're really concerned about America. They say Canada's about 2 or 3 years ahead of America as far as the degree of socialism, totalitarianism. They're about 3 years ahead of us. So what you see in Canada is a reflection of what's coming our way. And their problem is getting people involved and knowing that you can make a difference. And I think this is a good start.
Yeah.
This is any country. And I gave him the story about Hungary, which was a Soviet bloc nation. I mean, you came from the eastern part of Europe, and you can actually turn it all around. So Hungary's a good case study. And when you have an Soviet bloc nation turn to pro-Americans want to retire in Hungary, so figure that one out.
Well, I
think it's all about awareness, Paul, and getting people excited. They can make a difference.
No, that's a good point. It's like with Hungary, I wanted to say that there's lots of people there who remember the communist years. I mean, I think a couple of weeks ago, we played a clip from a Romanian parliament member who testified during Ron Johnson's hearing on COVID and propaganda. And the Romanians were one of the few countries who said no to the EU's pressure to push mandates, vaccine mandates. And the reason they said was because it reminded them of the Soviet the Soviet commissars, as they called it, or, the Soviet pressure. And they knew that when the tyrants from up top come and they say, hey, you have to do this and you have to do it for political reasons, they're like, well, you're kind of reminding us of what the Soviets used to do. And so we're saying no. And, that's what the Hungarians, they're remembering that. And I'm wondering if maybe that's what where the Canadians are coming from. They saw with the truckers convoy, and then they see this tyrant Trudeau, and now they finally woken up. And maybe that also portends for us because we see what happened with the Biden administration and all the censoring, the FBI swatting, and whatnot. So maybe the outlook is sunnier than some people believe.
Yeah, well, I think it has to get so bad before it gets so good.
Well,
I think that's what they're seeing, the lockdown of their finances for the truckers. This is where they're at. They know they have a dictator.
Yeah.
And I think they have to realize a way to get rid of them is through the electoral process, but you got to get people involved. That's like that here is like any country. I mean, it's about awareness and education, Paul. And this is a good report card on where people are at.
Good job, Wayne. We're going to have a link to that in the description. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the New American Daily. Remember to visit thenewamerican.com for more truth-binding news. We'll see you tomorrow.